Commander Jake stood on the bridge of the human ship UES Defiance, watching the battle rage in the dark space ahead. Bright flashes of light lit up the void as alien ships fired at each other with weapons that could destroy entire cities. The war had been going on for over 200 years, and still no one was winning. The Empire ships looked like giant crystals floating through space. Their weapons shot beams of pure energy that could cut through the strongest metal. On the other side, the Hive Collective flew in ships that looked like giant bugs, black and shiny, with thousands of smaller fighters swarming around them like angry wasps. Between them both, the strange beings called the Ethereal Consortium moved through space like ghosts. Their ships seemed to be made of light itself, appearing and disappearing as they attacked their enemies from all sides. All of them were fighting for the same thing, the Nexus Gates. Jake had seen many of these ancient devices during his 20 years in the human fleet. They were huge metal rings, each one as wide as a small moon, covered in symbols that no one could read. The aliens all believed these gates were the key to everything: transportation across the galaxy in seconds, unlimited power, control over space itself. They were all wrong. Down in the research section of the ship, Lieutenant Brooks sat alone in her small lab. She was the best in the human fleet, which meant she studied the remains of dead alien civilizations. Right now, she was looking at a small piece of metal taken from one of the Nexus gates. It was warm to the touch and hummed with a sound so low she could feel it in her bones. Knew what the other aliens did not. The Nexus gates were not transportation devices. They were not power sources. They were something much worse. They were watching devices, and something was still using them. The piece of metal in her hands contained data that had taken her team 5 years to decode. It told a story that would terrify every living being in the galaxy if they knew the truth. The beings who built these gates, the ones everyone called the architects, had not disappeared like the history books said. They had run away. Something had scared them so badly that an entire civilization had packed up and left the galaxy. Something they called the Harvest. Captain Davis walked into the communication room where his intelligence officers were listening to alien radio signals. Every day they heard the same things, the talking about their next big attack, the Hive planning to send more warriors to the front lines, the ethereals speaking in their strange singing voices about reshaping reality. None of them had any idea what was really coming. Looked at the star charts on the wall. Red dots showed where battles were happening right now. Blue dots showed human colonies. Yellow dots showed the Nexus gates that everyone was fighting over, but there were other marks on the chart that only humans could see. Green dots far out in empty space, where human deep space sensors had detected something moving. Something big was coming toward their galaxy from the dark space between stars. The sensors showed shapes so huge they made entire solar systems look small. They were still far away, but they were getting closer. Dr. Lisa Carter was working late again in her secret research base on Haven's Edge, a small planet on the edge of human space. Her team had been studying pieces of architect technology for years, trying to understand what had really happened to them. The official story said the architects were peaceful beings who had built wonderful things before mysteriously vanishing millions of years ago. The real story was very different. Lisa had found records hidden deep in the architect data cores, records that spoke of a great enemy that fed on entire civilizations. The architects had tried to fight this enemy and lost. Their final messages were full of fear and desperation as they prepared to flee their home galaxy. But before they left, they had done something clever. They had built the Nexus gates not as gifts for future civilizations, but as traps. The gates looked valuable and useful, so any intelligent species would fight over them. But really, the gates were sending signals out into deep space, telling the Harvest where to find new victims. Back on the UES Defiance, Marine Sergeant Ben Taylor was getting ready for another mission. His squad was being sent to a planet where a Nexus gate had been discovered. Their official orders were to help secure the area around the gate. Their real orders were very different. Ben's job was to make sure that none of the alien species figured out what the gates really did. If they learned the truth, they might find a way to turn off the signals or, worse, try to communicate with whatever was coming. The planet below was covered in the wreckage of alien ships. Crystal fragments mixed with broken hive armor and the fatting energy traces of destroyed ethereal vessels. All of them had died fighting over something that was really a beacon calling death to their doorstep. Admiral Helen Price sat in a room deep underground on Earth, surrounded by screens showing every part of the galaxy. This was the Shadow Council, the secret group that really commanded human forces. Only a few hundred people in all of human space knew the truth about the Nexus gates and what was coming. On the screens, she could see the latest battle reports. The Empire was building new weapons that could destroy entire planets. The Hive Collective was breeding millions of new warriors. The Ethereal Consortium was experimenting with technology that could bend space and time. All of this military buildup was exactly what the approaching enemy wanted to see. The harvest fed on civilization itself, growing stronger as it consumed more advanced species. Every new weapon the aliens built, every technological breakthrough they achieved, just made them more valuable prey. Helen looked at the countdown timer on her personal screen. The approaching fleet would reach the galaxy in less than 2 years. When it arrived, the real war would begin. Until then, humanity had to keep playing their part in the lie, pretending to be just another struggling species fighting for scraps while secretly preparing for a battle that would decide the fate of all life in the galaxy. Outside, the stars continued to shine, unaware that something ancient and hungry was moving through the darkness toward them. The greatest deception in galactic history was still working, but time was running out. Dr. Lisa Carter wiped the sweat from her face as she worked in the hot underground lab on Haven's Edge. Her team had been working for 18 hours straight, trying to decode the latest batch of architect data they had found. The information was getting worse each day. The computer screen in front of her showed a star map from millions of years ago. Red zones marked where entire civilizations had simply vanished, not destroyed in war, not killed by disease or natural disaster, just gone as if they had never existed at all. Lisa's assistant, Dr. Gary, looked up from his workstation with tired eyes. "I found something else," he said quietly. "The architects weren't the first ones to run away. There were others before them, lots of others." The data showed a pattern going back billions of years. Advanced civilizations would rise, build great technologies, spread across many star systems. Then something would come for them. The survivors called it different names, but they all described the same thing. A force that consumed everything, leaving empty space where entire species used to live. On the other side of the galaxy, Marine Sergeant Ben Taylor crouched behind a broken wall on the planet 442b. His squad was watching a group of soldiers examine a Nexus gate that had been discovered 3 days ago. The crystal-skinned aliens were setting up their equipment, preparing to study the ancient device. Ben spoke into his radio in a whisper. "Command, they are getting too close. They have some kind of new scanning device." The voice that came back was calm but firm. "Stop them, Sergeant, whatever it takes." Ben nodded to his soldiers. They had done this before. A few well-placed explosives would make it look like the Hive Collective had attacked the site. They would blame their enemies and never suspect that humans were behind it. As his team moved into position, Ben thought about his family back on Earth. His wife and 2 kids had no idea what he was really doing out here. They thought he was fighting to protect human colonies from alien attacks. In a way, he was, just not in the way they imagined. Back on Haven's Edge, Lisa made another disturbing discovery. The architect records talked about something called the counting phase. Before the harvest came to destroy a galaxy, it would watch and wait. It would let civilizations grow and fight each other, getting stronger and more advanced. When they reached a certain level of technology, the harvest would arrive. The Nexus gates were not just watching devices. They were measuring tools. Each battle, each new weapon, each technological breakthrough was being recorded and evaluated. When the numbers reached the right level, the dinner bell would ring. Captain Sam Phillips stood on the bridge of the UES Ghost Runner, humanity's most advanced spy ship. His vessel was so well hidden that it could sit right next to an alien fleet without being detected. Right now, he was watching something that made his blood run cold. Massive shapes were moving in the empty space between galaxies. They were still too far away for detailed scans, but the size readings were incredible. Each object was larger than most star systems. There were hundreds of them, maybe thousands, all moving toward the Milky Way galaxy. Sam's communications officer, Lieutenant Amy Roberts, looked up from her station. "Sir, we're getting signals from those things. They're talking to each other." The signals were unlike anything humans had ever heard. Not radio waves or laser communications, but something that seemed to bend space itself. The messages were too complex to understand, but the meaning was clear. The Harvest Fleet was coordinating its approach. On Earth, Admiral Helen Price called an emergency meeting of the Shadow Council. Representatives from every human colony world appeared on secure video screens around the conference room. Their faces were grim as they listened to the latest reports. "The timeline has moved up," Helen announced. "Our long-range sensors show the Harvest Fleet will arrive in 14 months, not the 2 years we originally calculated." Murmurs of concern filled the room. 14 months was not enough time to complete all their preparations. They had been planning for this moment for decades, but there was still so much work to do. Colonel Tony Jackson, speaking from the frontier world of New Geneva, raised his hand. "What about the other species? Are we going to warn them?" Helen shook her head. "Not yet. If we tell them the truth now, they might panic and do something stupid. We need them to keep fighting each other until the last possible moment." It was a hard decision, but necessary. The other species had to believe the lie until humanity was ready to reveal the truth. Too early, and chaos would ruin everything. Too late, and there would be no time to mount a proper defense. Dr. Wells, working in a secret facility on the moon, finally cracked the architect language completely. What he found in their final records was terrifying. The harvest did not just destroy civilizations. It absorbed them. Every mind, every piece of knowledge, every cultural achievement was taken and stored in vast digital libraries. The harvest was not a mindless force of destruction. It was intelligent. It learned from every species it consumed, becoming smarter and more dangerous with each conquest. It had been doing this for so long that it knew every possible defense, every strategy that might be used against it. But found something else in the records, something that gave him hope. The harvest had never faced humanity before. It had consumed thousands of species, but all of them had been honest fighters who met their enemies head-on. None of them had ever tried to fight with lies and deception on such a massive scale. Agent Sarah Mitchell infiltrated a Hive collective meeting on there. Disguised as a worker drone, she listened as the insect-like aliens planned their next major offensive against the Empire. They were going to commit their entire military to one massive battle that would decide control of 3 Nexus gates. Sarah planted false information in their data networks, reports that suggested they were planning to attack Hive nursery worlds. The lies would spread through their communication system like a virus, causing them to change their battle plans at the worst possible moment. As she escaped from the Hive facility, Sarah wondered how many more lies she would have to tell before this was over. Every deception brought them closer to the moment when the truth would finally be revealed. But until then, the greatest show in galactic history had to continue. The aliens would keep fighting their pointless war, never knowing that every battle brought their real enemy closer. And humanity would keep pulling the strings from the shadows, preparing for the day when the curtain would finally fall and the real war would begin. The sky above New Geneva Colony burned orange as ships rained fire from orbit. Colonel Amy Roberts ran through the burning streets, helping the last group of civilians reach the evacuation ships. Behind her, her soldiers fought desperately against the crystal warriors that had landed in the city center. "Come on, move faster," Amy shouted to an elderly man who was struggling to keep up. "The ships won't wait much longer." What they did not know was that most of the civilians had been secretly moved off-world 3 months ago. The people Amy was helping now were volunteers who had stayed behind to make the evacuation look real. Every person here knew they might die to keep the lie alive. Amy's radio crackled with updates from her squad leaders. "Colonel, they are pushing hard toward the government building. We can't hold them much longer." "Hold for 10 more minutes," Amy replied. "That's all we need." 3 star systems away, the real operation was taking place. Dr. Wells and his team were working frantically inside a hidden research station built into an asteroid. They had finally found a way to turn off one of the Nexus gates without alerting the Harvest fleet. His hands shook as he connected the final wires to the alien device. One wrong move and the gate might explode, taking half the solar system with it. But if he succeeded, humanity would have its first real weapon against their true enemy. "Power levels are stable," reported his assistant, engineer Kate Davis. "The architect's shutdown codes are working." The massive ring of metal went dark for the first time in millions of years, allowed himself a small smile. They had done it. They had figured out how to blind the Watchers. But their celebration was cut short by an alarm. "Sir, we're detecting movement in deep space," Kate said, her face pale. "Something big just changed course toward our galaxy." The Harvest fleet had noticed. One gate going offline might have been ignored, but they were paying attention now. The timeline was getting shorter. Back on New Geneva, Amy led her remaining soldiers in a fighting retreat toward the spaceport. The crystal warriors were beautiful and terrible, their bodies made of living gemstone that could deflect most weapons. But they had one weakness that Amy's people had learned to exploit. "Hit them with the sonic charges," she ordered. The sound weapons created vibrations that shattered the aliens' crystal bodies like glass. It was brutal and efficient, but Amy felt sick every time she used them. These were not her real enemies. They were victims of the same lie that was consuming the entire galaxy. As her transport ship lifted off from the burning colony, Amy watched the flag being raised over the government building. Another human world had fallen to alien conquest. The news reports would show it as a great defeat for humanity. In reality, it was exactly what they had planned. Dr. Lisa Carter made her most frightening discovery yet in the deep archives of the architect data. The Harvest did not just consume civilizations randomly. It was farming them. It would seed young worlds with life, guide their evolution, then return when they reached the right level of development. Earth had been seeded 4 billion years ago. Humanity was not fighting to save the galaxy from an invader. They were fighting to escape from their own farmers. Lisa sat back in her chair, the weight of this knowledge crushing down on her. Everything humanity had ever achieved, every step in their evolution, had been planned by the Harvest. They were supposed to be the next meal. But something had gone wrong with the plan. Humans had developed differently than expected. Instead of becoming another advanced civilization waiting to be consumed, they had learned to lie, to deceive, to fight in ways the Harvest had never seen before. Captain Tony Jackson commanded the defense of the Vega system as ethereal consortium forces attacked his fleet. The energy beings moved through space like living lightning, their ships phasing in and out of normal reality. They were trying to reach the Nexus gate hidden in the outer planets. "All ships maintain the defensive line," Tony ordered. "Don't let them through." His fleet was badly outnumbered, but they had to hold. Human engineers were working frantically to sabotage the gate before the ethereals could study it. If the energy beings learned what the gates really did, they might find a way to communicate with the harvest directly. The battle was brutal. Human ships exploded in brilliant flashes as the ethereals' energy weapons tore through their hulls. But for every human ship destroyed, the aliens lost 2 of their own. Tony's people fought with the desperation of those who knew the real stakes. Agent Sarah Mitchell had spent 6 months living among the Hive Collective, her body modified with alien technology to look like one of their worker drones. She had learned their language, understood their culture, even grown to respect them in some ways, which made what she was about to do even harder. The Hive was planning to attack the ethereal with a new type of weapon that could destroy energy beings. It was exactly the kind of technological breakthrough that would attract the harvest's attention. Sarah had to stop them without revealing her true identity. She planted a computer virus in their military networks, one designed to look like it came from hackers. The virus would corrupt their weapon designs and delay their attack for months, long enough for humanity to prepare for the real war. As Sarah made her escape from the Hive facility, she thought about all the species she was helping to deceive. The proud with their crystal cities, the organized Hive with their perfect society, the mystical ethereals who could touch the very fabric of reality. All of them were going to die if humanity's plan failed. But that was the price of survival. In war, especially a war like this, someone had to make the hard choices. Someone had to carry the weight of necessary lies. On Earth, Admiral Helen Price received reports from across the galaxy. The deception was holding, but barely. More alien species were starting to ask questions about humanity's role in the conflicts. Some were beginning to wonder why humans always seemed to be in the right place at the wrong time. "How much longer can we keep this up?" asked General Mike, her second in command. Helen looked at the countdown timer on her screen. 8 months until the harvest arrived. 8 months to finish their preparations while keeping the biggest lie in galactic history alive. "Long enough," she said. "It has to be long enough." In the depths of space, ancient machines stirred to life. The harvest had noticed the missing signal from the disabled Nexus gate. Scouts were being dispatched to investigate. The galaxy's time was running out, and still nobody except humanity knew what was really coming for them. The greatest performance in history was reaching its final act. Engineer Lisa Adams stared at the display screens aboard the UES Watchtower, humanity's most secret deep space station. What she saw made her hands shake. The Harvest fleet had finally come close enough for detailed scans, and the images were beyond anything they had imagined. Each ship was not really a ship at all. They were living cities, vast creatures that had grown in the empty space between galaxies. Some looked like enormous jellyfish with tentacles that stretched for thousands of miles. Others resembled giant flowers made of metal and flesh, their petals opening and closing as they moved through space. The largest one was bigger than Earth's entire solar system. It pulsed with a sickly green light that seemed to bend space around it. Lisa could see smaller shapes moving across its surface, structures that might have been cities or organs or something completely alien. "How many are there?" asked Captain Bob Martinez, the station commander. Lisa checked her instruments again, hoping she had made a mistake. "At least 3,000, maybe more. They're spread across a front that's wider than our entire galaxy." On the planet below, Dr. Brooks was having the worst day of his life. His team had finally decoded the complete Harvest database, and what they found changed everything. The Harvest was not just one species or even one type of creature. It was a collection of every civilization it had ever consumed. The jellyfish ships were what remained of a peaceful water-dwelling species from another galaxy. The metal flowers had once been proud plant-like beings who lived on garden worlds. Every shape in the harvest fleet represented a different species that had been absorbed, changed, and turned into part of the consuming machine. "They're not destroying civilizations," said to his assistant, Dr. Jenny. "They're collecting them, adding them to their own numbers." Jenny looked at the data with growing horror. "You mean everyone who gets caught by the harvest becomes part of it?" Nodded. "Their minds, their knowledge, their biological traits, everything gets absorbed and used. The harvest grows stronger with every species it takes." Meanwhile, General Corinne White activated Protocol 7 from her command bunker deep beneath the Rocky Mountains. All across human space, hidden facilities began powering up systems that had been carefully concealed for decades. What the galaxy was about to see would change everything. The first facility to reveal itself was hidden inside a seemingly empty asteroid belt near Alpha. The asteroid suddenly moved apart, revealing a massive shipyard where hundreds of warships had been built in complete secrecy. These were not the small frigates and cruisers that humanity had been showing the galaxy. These were dreadnoughts, each one larger than the biggest alien battleships. Similar reveals happened in dozen other systems. Hidden bases emerged from fake planets. Weapons platforms rose from the surfaces of dead moons. Entire fleets that had been disguised as space debris suddenly came to life, their hulls gleaming with technology that no other species had seen before. The alien races watching through their spy satellites could hardly believe what they were seeing. Humanity, the species they had considered weak and scattered, suddenly showed a military force that rivaled their own combined fleets. Commander Steve Parker stood on the bridge of the UES Revelation, humanity's new flagship. The ship was so advanced it made crystal technology look primitive. Its hull was made from processed architect materials that could repair themselves. Its weapons fired projectiles that could punch holes through reality itself. "All human fleets, this is Commander Parker," he broadcast on open channels that every species in the galaxy could hear. "Prepare to receive emergency transmission. All alien forces stand down immediately." Across the galaxy, the message went out in every known language. What followed was a recording that Admiral Helen Price had prepared months ago, explaining the truth about the Nexus gates, the Architect civilization, and the approaching Harvest fleet. The reaction was immediate and chaotic. On the Crystal Council gathered in emergency session, their translucent faces showing shock and disbelief. They had been fighting for devices that were really traps, beacons calling death to their doorstep. In the deep hives of the collective, millions of warrior drones stopped their preparations for war and waited for new orders from their queens. The insect-like beings were efficient above all else, and they quickly understood that their previous enemy was now their only hope for survival. The ethereal consortium had the strangest reaction of all. The energy beings suddenly began to glow brighter, their forms shifting and dancing through space in patterns that their experts recognized as extreme excitement. They had been searching for a greater purpose beyond their physical existence, and now they had found it. But understanding the truth and accepting it were two different things. On dozens of worlds, alien leaders refused to believe the human claims. Some called it an elaborate trick to gain control of the galaxy. Others said it was impossible for such a threat to exist without their knowledge. Captain Rachel Davis led a small fleet to the edge of the galaxy to escort the first alien observers who wanted to see the harvest for themselves. The science ship Crystal Seeker followed her human vessels into the dark space beyond the galactic rim. When they saw the approaching fleet with their own sensors, the crystal beings fell silent. Their ship's captain, a tall figure whose body sparkled like a living diamond, spoke in a voice full of wonder and terror. "By the sacred crystals, it's real. They're really coming." The message went back to then spread to every other species. The humans were telling the truth. The galaxy had been fighting over the instruments of their own destruction, and now their farmers were coming to collect the harvest. Back on Earth, Admiral Helen Price watched the reports coming in from across the galaxy. Some species were already moving their fleets to join the human forces. Others were still too shocked to act. A few were trying to find ways to surrender to the harvest before it arrived. "Will it be enough?" asked General. Helen looked at the tactical displays showing the size of both forces. The harvest fleet was enormous, but the combined military might of the galaxy was not insignificant. More importantly, they now had something the harvest had never faced before. "For the first time in millions of years, their victims know they're coming," Helen said. "That changes everything." Lieutenant Colonel Grace Turner prepared her Marine unit for a mission that would have been impossible to imagine just days before. They were going to attempt the first boarding action against a harvest construct. Their goal was to learn how these living ships worked and find their weaknesses. As her transport ship approached the smallest harvest scout, Grace wondered what they would find inside. Would there be crew members they could talk to, or just biological machinery? Were the absorbed civilizations still conscious somewhere in that alien structure, or had they been completely consumed? The real war was about to begin, and nobody knew what rules it would follow. The Battle of the Spiral Arm began when the first harvest construct entered the galaxy's outer edge. Captain Rachel Davis led her fighter squadron toward the massive living ship, her small craft dwarfed by something the size of a gas giant. The creature's surface writhed with movement as millions of smaller organisms prepared to defend their host. "Remember, aim for the nerve clusters," Rachel said into her radio. "Hit them fast and get out before they adapt." Her fighters launched their special weapons, quantum torpedoes that had been built using secrets learned from the architect ruins. The explosions sent ripples of energy across the creature's skin, causing sections of it to go dark and still. But the victory was short-lived. The damaged areas began to glow and heal themselves within minutes. The harvest had learned from billions of years of warfare. It knew how to fix almost any damage. Dr. Jennifer watched from the command center as her architect array came online. The network of modified nexus gates spread across dozens of star systems, all working together to create the largest jamming field in galactic history. For the first time in millions of years, the harvest fleet found itself blind and confused. "The interference is working," Jennifer reported to Admiral Price. "They can't coordinate their attacks anymore." Individual harvest constructs began acting on their own, no longer part of a unified strategy. Some charged forward recklessly. Others hung back, uncertain without guidance from their leaders. The galaxy's defenders suddenly had a chance they never thought possible. Admiral Peter Stone coordinated the combined galactic fleet from his flagship, the UES Unity. Around him, ships from every species in the galaxy fought side by side. Crystal vessels fired alongside hive swarm fighters. Ethereal energy beings merged with human shield generators to create barriers of pure force. "All fleets concentrate fire on the smaller constructs first," Peter ordered. "Don't let them learn our tactics." The battle spread across multiple star systems as more harvest creatures entered the galaxy. Each one was different, shaped by the species it had absorbed. Some looked like giant spiders with legs that could wrap around entire planets. Others resembled floating mountains covered in weapon ports that fired beams of concentrated death. Lieutenant Colonel Grace Turner led the first successful boarding mission against a medium-sized harvest construct. Her Marines used special suits that could exist in the twisted reality inside the living ships. What they found there would haunt them forever. The interior of the ship was like walking through a nightmare. Corridors made of living tissue pulsed with alien heartbeats. Rooms filled with floating tanks contained the preserved remains of a dozen different species, their minds still active but trapped in eternal servitude. "Command, you need to see this," Grace said into her communicator. She was standing in what looked like a library, but instead of books, the shelves held glowing crystals that contained the memories of entire civilizations. In one crystal, she could see the last days of a species that looked like living trees. In another, the final battle of a race of beings made of pure music. Every species the harvest had ever consumed was stored here, their knowledge and culture preserved but enslaved. Grace's demolition expert, Sergeant Tim Clark, placed charges around the memory core. "This is going to hurt," he warned. When the explosives went off, the entire harvest construct screamed, not with sound but with a psychic wail that every living being in the star system could feel. The creature began to tear itself apart as the freed minds of 1,000 species fought to escape their prison. The victory gave the Galactic Alliance hope, but it came at a terrible cost. They learned that every harvest construct they destroyed also killed millions of consciousness that had been trapped inside for eons. Winning this war meant accepting the deaths of countless innocent beings. Dr. Brooks made his most important discovery in the wreckage of the destroyed construct. Hidden in the biological data cores, he found something incredible. The harvest was not immortal. It could be killed, but only by turning its own nature against it. "They absorb everything they encounter," explained to the War Council. "But what if we gave them something they couldn't digest?" His plan was desperate and dangerous. Humanity would allow itself to be partially absorbed by one of the larger constructs, but they would carry with them a virus that attacked the harvest's ability to process consciousness. It was a suicide mission that might destroy the entire enemy fleet. Captain Steve Parker volunteered to lead the mission aboard a specially prepared ship filled with human volunteers. As they approached the largest harvest creature, a thing so vast it had its own gravity field, Steve thought about everything humanity had accomplished. They had started as farmers' livestock, bred to be consumed by an ancient force. But they had learned to lie to deceive, to fight in ways no other species had ever imagined. Now they were going to use those skills one last time. The harvest creature swallowed their ship eagerly, adding what it thought were new victims to its collection. But as the absorption process began, the virus spread through its systems like wildfire. The creature's ability to control its absorbed species began to break down. Across the galaxy, other harvest constructs suddenly found themselves losing control of their internal prisoners. Millions of long-dead civilizations fought back from within, tearing apart their captors from the inside. The tide of battle turned as the enemy fleet began destroying itself. The war that followed lasted 3 more years, but the outcome was no longer in doubt. The galaxy's united forces hunted down the remaining harvest creatures one by one, freeing the trapped consciousness within each ship. It was brutal work, but necessary. When the last harvest construct was destroyed, the galaxy faced a new challenge. Billions of beings from dead civilizations had been freed, their minds intact but their bodies long gone. The work of giving them new homes and new forms would take generations. But humanity had proven something important. Sometimes the greatest victory comes not from strength or technology, but from the willingness to fight a different kind of war. They had turned the galaxy's greatest lie into its most necessary truth. The real war was over, but the peace that followed would be harder than anyone imagined.